Welcome to KIMEcast, where we break through and cut the BS in sports medicine, rehabilitation, and sports performance, and talk about how things really work. Welcome to KIMEcast. Tony Mikla, Russ Dunning. So let's talk a little bit about some of our learnings we've had around the athlete complex, and we'll call this the athlete paradox. But this idea, and I think it's interesting as being in this field for so long. This is a really great concept to try to identify and define. It's something I've seen for a long time, and the concept is this: that basically, as an athlete gets better and their skill set improves, then their exposure to more reps, more sports, more injury also goes up at that same time. So there's this change in need in an athlete's life cycle, where in the beginning of an athlete, for like a young person or a youth athlete, where they're like learning the skills, they can do, they do multiple sports. We're a big fan of that. They do multiple things, but it's non-specific things, and they're developing this kind of foundation. They're, usually quite weak. They're underdeveloped, so they need so much strength and foundation building. And then as that starts to narrow and they start to become a higher skill set and pursue a longer path, develop a really strong skill set in a certain sport or a certain few sports, then they suddenly become one of the better players on the field or one of the better players on the court. And at that time, they've got this foundation built up. Now they have this, and they may have gotten injured in the foundation building process. Mm-hmm. They'll have a lot of reps at that time as well. So that's an injured risk period. But as they get more and more specific, now their load is going to go up even more in that specific path because of their skill set is high. So they're probably going to be the one who plays the most, or they're the one that coach wants in the game. They're the one that's going to be delivering more often. So therefore, they get more exposure, probably playing on multiple teams. This sort of thing.
Yeah, it's common. If we see a 12-year-old athlete, you can almost say the next question. If they're a 12-year-old athlete seeing a physical therapist, it's common to ask the parent, "Oh, they're probably the hardest hitter on the team, aren't they?"
Yeah.
And the parent will say, "Yeah, she's always starting. He's always starting. Coach plays them a lot. Yes, they play on two different teams. Yes, they do this and this." Like if you're seeing us at age 12, you're probably one of the best. Another way of saying it is you're overexposed.
Yeah. Yeah, we don't see, that's one great thing about it, is you don't see non-good players at 12 because they're usually not playing enough, not playing hard enough, not developed enough. I think one of the biggest issues is, they're playing more and more exposure, and then they're also skeletally more mature, but the development of the muscular system to support that skeleton system is usually behind. So then they're significantly at risk, especially in that age group. But
yeah. So you'll see these athletes that have IQ, they have great sport IQ, great sports skill. They've played the sport a lot. They are a starter, and we see them a lot. And then you'll also see the ones that are a little more fragile. Maybe they don't have good strength of the connective tissue. Maybe they don't have great mechanics. They've got a valgus collapse. Their foot turns out. Maybe they've got lack of core control. So they've got a lot of dysfunctions, movement, strength, stability dysfunctions that lead to an increased risk. So we see two people a lot in the clinic. In sports medicine, we'll see the athletes that have movement dysfunctions. That's how we quantify what's going on. There's a movement dysfunction. And or they're just flat out overexposed. They're one of the best athletes on the team, and for those, the sports medicine provider usually we put on the brakes. We teach them how to recover. We teach them how to communicate. We teach them about tissue load and what overload is, and nutrition and sleep, because oftentimes they might not have that many movement dysfunction. They're just flat out overexposed.
Yeah, I think that's the thing that to talk about. It's like what is our role and where does it hit, in this process? Just because we get to, we usually are thrown into it by, whoever walks in the door that day and tells us, "Hey, this is what's going on with my son or my daughter, and this is okay." So where we intervene. So I think that there's two different kinds of intervention. There's the intervention of, hey, you're in the foundations building phase where you're not that specific yet. You are active and playing a lot of different sports, but you don't have this fundamental foundation building. So the solution is actually to get stronger, to help your skeleton mature so you can tolerate the loads of daily practice, the loads of regular gameplay, the loads of competition. That's a many year cycle process. I think that's one of the ways we intervene. I think the second way that we come to intervene is the person's gone through that, hopefully, or they haven't, but hopefully they went through that. And then they're at a level now where they're more in a specific play, where they're playing at a higher level. They have the fundamental skill sets. They're being asked to do more because of the best player on the team. And then I think we have to then teach recovery strategies. Ideally, this would be I think this is the paradox. This is the ideal scenario, is that we meet that person at 16, 17, 18, 25 years old, whatever it is, a little bit older athlete, and we're teaching them recovery. This is where all the recovery things are so critical. Mm-hmm. Whereas what doesn't work is then we get an athlete who's, once again, 12, who's playing a sport-specific sport, who's being demanded to do it at a high level, and they haven't built the foundations. Mm-hmm. And then we end up talking about helping them recover. Mm-hmm. We shouldn't be in a recovery conversation at that age.
We're too soon for that intervention.
Yeah, so that's where the whole thing kind of blows up.
Yeah, we kind of ask, what are we doing here?
Yeah.
Why are you playing one sport 11 and a half months out of the year? And I think, anti-fragile, another word would be resilience. What does that look like? It is changing the stresses on the body throughout the year to give appropriate time, particularly during those developmental years. For a female athlete, they definitely age like 10 to 14, very formative years that you should stress the skeleton, the tissue in different ways throughout the year to give the best output, physically, and just translate that 2 more years for the male athlete, age 12 to say probably 15. I think it's a great strategy to help with building an anti-fragile athlete is having a 2-sport mindset. And sometimes for those sports that have enough skill and IQ demand that they have to be involved 11 months out of the year, I think this is where strength and conditioning always can give you kind of that secondary outlet of how to load the body in other ways, other stressors to help become more formidable.
Yeah. If we are talking about 2 sports, we could get into that a little bit. If I was to recommend, I'd love the idea of like a multi-directional sport like soccer or football, lacrosse, something like that. And then maybe another like throwing sport or a ball-oriented sport where there's a hand-eye coordination component. If you can somehow like get those 2 things to both happen, that's going to give you the best like developmental skill set for any human, athlete or not. I think all as humans, those are skill sets that you want to acquire that are going to be good for basic survival in life. But you can do multi-directional things. You can throw something. You can catch something. You can do these kind of basic skills. And then by doing that, you're also developing your body in a very authentic, organic way, which is what it's all about. Can you do things forward and back? Can you do things side to side? Can you rotate? Can you throw something? Can you catch something?
Yeah.
Those are kind of the basic movement patterns.
Yeah, I think sports are becoming like our ultimate frontier of actually how to do this. Where else in life do you do this unless you're out hunting as a 12-year-old or you're farming as a 12-year-old? You're not getting the body stress. So, thanks to Industrial Revolution, sports is kind of like, it's a big deal.
Yeah, it's a big deal.
It's not just growing D1 athletes and professional athletes. It's actually has nothing to do with that at all.
Yeah, I love the neuroscience here is insane as far as like brain development and skill acquisition modeling and such. Obviously, whatever you put input into the brain, it will kind of adapt and develop to it. So you can build mathematical models and play chess, and those things are great development tools in young people as well. But when you look at the function of the brain, the neurology suggests that it's designed for movement first and foremost. So if you're not moving, you're not giving it enough input. And that's why you have your 5 senses. That's where you have the vision, hearing, and then, of course, touch, and then you get into kind of, smell and taste. But those big 3 of the 5 there, those are all exclusively oriented around movement. Mm-hmm. And if you're not out there moving and challenging your movement or challenging your body in a different way, you're not going to develop or hone in on those senses, which then we wonder what they're going to look like later, right? If they never got like peaked, if they never went up that high, then they're going to fall faster, I would think, when you're 60, right? Mm-hmm. But if you're like really quite good at it, and then, hopefully you can maintain that level for longer on, then you can enjoy your years at the end where your senses are still sharp. I mean, we see senses, that's the aging cycle, right? The senses start to become a problem.
Well, I think this is the movement IQ that I think was coined not that long ago, or kinesthetic IQ. I think it's a big deal. I think we should be helping our young people foster, hand-eye coordination, foot-eye coordination, stamina, conditioning, how to rotate effectively. It's Over the weekend, I was with my little 8-year-old Harper. She has no intent of playing softball, but there we are with a bat on a ball swinging. She's trying to hit it as hard as she can. The neighbor comes by and like, oh, we got a slugger on our hands. Like, she goes, I don't play softball. She's just learning how to swing and hit things, And I think it's an important skill set. We should have these multifaceted skills, whether or not we play the sport at an elite level is kind of regardless.
Yeah, you don't have to go practice 5 days a week, but just be able to do the task.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, let's go back to the athlete paradox. I think it's so interesting. We look at research and we do find these themes. If you have a lot of exposure in a short period of time, you're going to lead to cumulative stress on the connective tissue. If you sandwich that stress into too short period of a time, you don't allow the body to fully recover in between bouts of stress. And this is why, season length is a big deal. Is the season extending for 4 months? Gosh, when you're playing football from late July all the way through late December because your team made it to the end, you're going to see a lot of nasty injuries in November and December because the tissue is tired, the body is tired. So being mindful of how long that season is and the overall exposure of the athlete. And that's well researched, well documented. And what do we do about it? Because that means the best of the best are bound to get injured. And on the other side of the coin, if you're...
On that note, let me just say real quick, because this is perfectly relevant. My son just asked me the other day, and I don't know this to be factual and speculating here, but he asked me about Zion. So Zion Williamson, hasn't had anywhere close to a full season in the NBA as far as health goes yet. Completely overpowered. He's a big guy, weighs almost 300 pounds, I think. But he's unbelievable vertical jump, well over 40 inches. He's one of the most explosive athletes we've ever seen in the world. So he's like, how come he never got hurt before? And, so I went through this whole thing. Like, well, in high school, he probably had to play 50% effort and was still dominant. The best player in the world, best player in the country. Maybe he was going 80%, but no one could compete with him on a regular basis. So he didn't have to work very hard on a regular basis. So, he was only going 80%, so doesn't get hurt, no challenge. He goes to Duke, plays a year at Duke, goes fairly hard most of the time. Certainly goes hard in the tournament. He blew out his shoe. He actually ripped the rubber off the bottom of his shoe. He's so explosive when he was at Duke. But he made it through the season. At that time in high school, you usually play maybe 25 to 30-something games. And then college, you play about 30-something games over the course of October to March. And then he goes into the NBA, which goes into an 82-game season, which basically goes from September to June, maybe July if you're that good. No, they've never made it to July, but nonetheless, at least 82 games. And you're playing 2 or 3 days a week. You're working out every day. You're doing all these things. That all of a sudden the stress on the body, the season tripled, in a 2-year period for him. And now against NBA players, he has to go at 100%. So before he's getting away going at 60, 80% for, his top high school years for his, 1 year at Duke. And then now he goes to the NBA and now he's going 100% every night, 82 games a year. Hasn't finished the season yet or anywhere close.
And if he would have spent that time to develop in college, might have had a great chance of developing his body to handle that stress.
Yeah.
Which probably takes a few year cycle.
Yeah, which is hard because when you look at him and you say that word develop, I don't know if you know who he is, but you wouldn't think he would need such a thing. I mean, this person is insanely gifted, but he's certainly heavy. He's overweight, he's probably 30, 40 pounds overweight in addition to his already big size, but he's so powerful. It's amazing. But when you say develop, we definitely developed tissue tolerance. He did not have the time to develop tissue tolerance at that size, that power, that body. He'd only been in that body for, but maybe he got there at 16, 17, 18. I'm sure he was growing into it,
Yeah. I mean, the Achilles tendon, those cells probably last, I think the last time I read, about 18 to 24 months for those cells. So in other words, he's only gone through 2 cycles in his Achilles tendon, his patellar tendon, to handle that mass.
Yeah.
And each cycle, the tissue kind of has that memory, gets thicker, gets a little bit bigger, gets more dense.
Yeah, so I don't think we developed a tissue tolerance. His strength would be hard to say it needs to be more, and his power would be hard to say it needs to be more. But the tissue to tolerate that force and power is certainly obviously been proven not to be there now because all of his injuries have been soft tissue related. So,
well, I think a perfect example of what development on that end is that you look at the Ironman and Ironwomen triathletes. There's no elite level triathletes in their late teens, early 20s. Right. And someone's stamina has the ability of being phenomenal at age 21, but their tissue cannot handle all of the training that those people endure. They do 50 hours a week of training. So it is an interesting kind of quality about connective tissue. It does need quite a few yearly cycles of load to be able to handle speed, power, and work.
Oh, that was fitting, talking about season length and stuff. That's an immediate example that came to mind.
Well, are we dealing with an overexposed athlete? But how do we get here? We're talking about one of the most elite athletes of the world. So when we talk about the lower skilled athletes, those we see those a lot. Those are the 14, 15, 16-year-old giraffes where the valgus comes in, their feet do all funky things. They have a hard time bouncing on one leg. And we see all these movement dysfunctions. And what we hope for young people is that through their teenage years, they become more resilient. They do strength patterns like squats, lunges, and hinges, and single leg and split stance patterns. They do core training. They do some resistance training and calisthenics and plyometrics. And when you do all that, hopefully you become a better athlete. But therein lies the paradox. If you become more athletic from that viewpoint, it does reduce your injury risk from what we see. All research points to that. But now if you are so good that you become the upper 20% in strength, power, and speed and stamina because you've just worked hard, now you're going to play a lot, and now you're back on the chopping block with enhanced injury rates. So it's kind of a damned if you do, damned if you don't situation. What I will say, though, is that the more powerful, the more stronger, even if overexposed, well, they can heal because at least they have a lot of mitochondria in their cells.
Yeah, all the other components are there to support the healing process for sure. Yeah, it's a tough thing to think about. You're like, man, you do all this preparation work, and I think this is the pivotal thing for if you are one of these athletes, or you're parenting one of these athletes, or for rehabbing one of these athletes, or working with them as a coach. It's this idea that have they built a foundation during this development process, and a foundation meaning do they have good mobility, do they have good strength, can their tissue tolerate the forces that's necessary, so that as they go into a realm where they start to play a lot and their skill set goes up and they're starting to get more and more developed, and they look like a beast, everything's going well, but now they're going to get really pushed and overexposed because they're the best person, because they're the best player, best athlete. Then I think our attention, if they've done the foundation well, our attention needs to then shift to the recovery training. This is what you see, like we see this in pros all day long. So this is the TB12 method from Tom Brady. It's phenomenal. It's great. But if you're, 13 or to 16, doing the TB12 is not going to turn you into Tom Brady.
Right. He's on the other end. This is the other end of the spectrum.
Yeah, he's already, and you could argue that Tom maybe didn't have an amazing foundation, which is why he peaked so late in his career, like well after he was at Michigan. Like, if he had built, or you have to build the foundation first, or have a natural gift, like I was just talking about with Zion. If you have this kind of natural gift to get there and get to the next level, that's great. Then you have to learn about recovery at that level. And that's where you see all these guys like LeBron taking care of his body, and Brady, and you name it. It's just all these guys have been famous for the way they take care of themselves over periods of time. But that's Patrick Mahomes is the current guy who's doing it. His training model is quite different than it was when he was in college in Texas. It's quite different than it was when he was in high school. He's not doing Olympic lifts and power cleans anymore. He's not doing super heavy squats. He does deadlift heavy one day a week, but he's not doing this crazy workout. He's spending one heavy lifting day a week because that's all he needs to maintain the level he's at. And then most of his work is specifically around throwing things, rotational focus, getting in and out of really extended mobility ranges. So he's focused on more of resiliency and injury tolerance or injury management than he is raising the bar of performance. So I think depending on where you're at in your athletic cycle, you can look to the pros as to what they're doing now as inspirational and great ideas, but that's not what got them there. Mm-hmm. What got them there was building a strong foundation in their earlier phases of life, when they're between 10 and 20, building a strength base or being genetically gifted a strength base at the very least.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think for a lot of those that don't, for the majority of us that don't have some magic, DNA gift, we're not born 6'5", we're not born, 300 pounds and have a 40-inch vert. For the majority of people, we frankly have to work very hard to develop, to get stronger and more powerful. And this is where, I see the threat. I see the threat of 7th graders, 8th graders, and 9th graders doing an excessive amount of skill acquisition work. They spend so much energy learning their sport and spending time in the IQ because the coach says, hey, if you do these things, you become a better athlete for my team and you play more, but at a cost because we only have so much time. And if they don't spend time getting their body stronger, getting more conditioned, getting more powerful by just hard sprinting or uphill climbs and doing that sort of thing, if the coach doesn't ever emphasize that, then they're frankly never going to get there with their body. They're more likely to get injured, and they're going to have just a shorter athletic life because they didn't spend time building the foundation. And some coaches do that very well. Other coaches don't do that as much. They're there to coach the sport, and that's it. And I think that depends on, frankly, how much load the coach has. If they're managing 100 athletes, very difficult. If they're managing 40 athletes, it's more doable.
Show me the incentive, I'll show you the result, right?
Well, that's it. Charlie Munger. Yeah.
So if the if the coach, unfortunately, at every level now, it's amazing like what goes on in high school and junior sports where, there's everything from volunteer coaches to coaches that are paid to be there. And then the ones that are paid to be there are, they have the risk of getting fired if they don't win,
Mm-hmm.
So a soccer coach, for example, it's in a club in America, at least, winning is a priority depending on what level team you're on. So if you're one of the premier teams and you're in a big club, you got some from the premier teams, winning's important. Mm-hmm. And if you don't win, then, you see that coach on the move. We see it all the time, right? Mm-hmm. We see it at the high school level, same thing. If you're not winning, boom, coach is on the move. So that they don't have the time to dedicate to like build it up so that this athlete might win in 2 or 3 years when in reality, it's exactly what needs to be done, especially at this age. We have to look in the mirror if you're coaching or influencing people in this age group of, youth athletes, anywhere through up through middle of high school for sure, is just developing them so that they're better in their future, not better or best right there in that moment.
Yeah.
You see this go so wrong so many times, and we see it all the time because we'll see that overdeveloped kid who's like early mature, 7th grader. He's a stud athlete. Well, because he's a foot taller than everybody else and outweighs people by 50 pounds. Right. And he's just absolutely dominant, And you see like a parent that's, super supportive of them and like over the top with everything and, max playing time and plays in all these all-star teams and everything. And knowing what I know about the body, when I see that, I'm like, the odds that this level of performance continues for the next 5 or 6 years to the level of a, higher level of high school is very, very low. Mm-hmm. Unless you look like LeBron, but it's we see it, just because you're a huge advantage, unless dad's also like 6'8" and a beast, you're probably not on that track, So we see, it's crazy that 7th, 8th, having a kid at an 8th grader, seeing these kids that are 7th, 8th grade, like the difference in the maturity. I mean, there's full on men, at 8th grade. And then there's kids who haven't had their first growth spurt yet, who look like a little twig, in the same class, same grade. And then this is big in the junior football programs where if you're over a certain amount of weight, you have to play the line. They won't let you go out and hit people, because that would be unsafe because of this big disparity that they have. Mm-hmm. But nonetheless, I think it's crazy to think that just because you were dominant at 7th grade or 8th grade, that is what your future's going to look like. We've seen that time and time again, and that's not the truth.
Yeah.
Now, there are the really gifted ones. A lot of times at 7th, 8th grade, you see some qualities where like, this one's got something.
Yeah.
That's different,
Yeah. Well, some of these, elite clubs, they can attract a lot of people with, if you want to be on a winning team, go to this club, whatever sport it is. And the challenge is, I wonder just how poor of a value system that is for the athlete, even if the athlete's the most gifted, or if the athlete's moderately gifted and wants to try hard. When your first goal is to win, I think you always will make these small decisions that sacrifice development. And at a young age, I think once they're fully built, you can have that mindset. And when are they fully built? Probably for females, 16. For males, 17, 18. And I think if you delay when that value beats all other values, that's only going to win for the family, for the athlete, for everyone involved. And that's for an elite mindset. I think that still holds true for an elite mindset. If you zoomed out, what's the health of the club? What's the health of the community? It's that mindset. What's the ideal for performance for my winning percentage at the sacrifices everything else, like a pro sports team? Then winning above all else. But when you're being paid to do a sport, as soon as you can't perform because of an injury, you're out. Someone's right next to it. And that's how pro sports are.
We don't see this we don't see that same developmental process though in Europe. We talked about this, in the past about the European soccer model, is that it's not all about winning at 12. Very, very little. Most of the work is about developmental skill sets so that as you get to be 14, 16, 18, you can contribute to being on the elite team. But that's the only team that matters. The elite team at 14 is a good team, but it's winning at that age is not really what they're after. Mm-hmm. They're after having a team that's going to win at 18, but that club is very incentivized to produce athletes that are going to play for that club that they can, for the better part, own. They pay them as pro athletes. So they go and they funnel the best and the brightest up to that top team level, and they want to win there because that's where the club makes money, right? That's where the TV is. That's where the stadiums are, the whole thing. So winning when you're really young as a team doesn't really matter to them. Whereas here, we don't have those types of cycles. We don't have these feeder programs that are nearly built the same. It's about win this season, and if you don't win this season, then that's it. Yeah, there's no, the coach doesn't continue. There's very little continuation and development over season to season. If you have that scenario, then I think that's phenomenal. And hopefully the viewpoint then is let's develop so that in a year from now, 2-3 years from now, that team is developed in a better way. The athletes are developed in a better way, which means that they can spend time on building a foundation and getting the athletes in a healthier level so they can tolerate things. So as they raise the bar and get up in this paradox of okay, now they're better skilled, there's going to be more exposures, bigger tournaments, bigger players, more difficult scenarios. Their injury risk is going to go up once again, but at least they'll be prepared for it, to your point.
Yeah. Well, I think, as you're talking, I'm thinking about the Olympics. I'm thinking of how many gold, silver, and bronze the United States has in different categories. I'm thinking of, pro sports and the difference between soccer and rugby and really in tennis. And it is interesting how, one of the most dominant and biggest countries in the world, we are the most luxurious in terms of money. We can afford anything as a country. And we have more people of more diverse backgrounds, which means we've got a lot of ethnic play in our puddle of America. And yet, there's a lot of sports that we're not even close to being dominant in. You could, go from soccer to tennis to, maybe swimming, and we see that at play in the Olympics, and you see it at the global stage. But that tells you, I wonder if some of our values are just flat out wrong. And if maybe other countries have had it figured out. Don't stress too fierce of competition early on for the sake, focus on development, not winning in the beginning.
Yeah, I think that's a big thing. I know Greg Rose put out a lot of good stuff about this with rotational athletes or throwing athletes or golf athletes would be in this category, suggesting that in America, if you were to go learn how to play baseball or learn how to golf, you'd spend a decent amount of time with a coach that would really pick apart the mechanics of your swing. So let's say golf, for example. If you go to a golf lesson, typically it looks a lot like, how do you stance for the front of the ball? How do you hold your grip? What angle the club face is, what your shoulder turn looks like, what your hip turn looks like, and all these details, what your foot weight shift looks like, etc. And it's very, very detailed. Hold your wrist like this, hold this way, hold that, extend this elbow, straighten this out, bend this thing, blah, blah. And what's become very evident in coaching and training and become a really well-researched topic over the last 10 years is that those types of cues actually diminish performance. Those types of cues that are very internally focused, like, hold your elbow like this, straighten this elbow out, hold your wrist here. Things that say, hey, internal body focus, put your body in this position, actually diminish performance because the brain is trying to figure out how to hit the ball. And in the meantime, also being told it has to straighten its elbow
restriction.
out.
It's like a governor. You're putting a governor in different parts of the movement.
Exactly. So those are been shown to actually diminish performance and diminish force output and power output in folks. Whereas the coaching in other countries has been, we're gonna play golf today. Here's the ball. Hit it as hard as you can. I'll come back in 50 swings when you figured it out. And then I might give you a pointer. But the first step is swing as hard as you can. Yeah. Because it's about developing force, it's about developing power, hand-eye coordination, the big concepts, the big principles. What position your knee is in exactly doesn't really matter, you know? So it's interesting. So we see dominance in that. So dominance in tennis, dominance in golf outside of the Americans. We do well in baseball. But we don't dominate. Dominican and Japan and Korea are very, very competitive in baseball compared to us in the way that they develop their athletes. And like you mentioned, in swimming, probably a very similar thing. Develop the machine first, not all the technicals around it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, another truth of it too is just to see. This is what I did with my kids. It's interesting being a sport PT and then having kids because you care more about your kids than your patients. So I'm like, all right, I got 3 people that I care the most about, and what am I going to do? How am I going to steer them? And what I honestly did is I just watched them move a lot, and I tried to say, what do you naturally do well? Like, oh, she's fast. Let's put you in fast sports. Oh, you know how to pivot and rotate. Maybe we'll go here. Oh, you got a great engine. You can keep up with me. You're only 4 years old and I run the block and you're keeping up? Okay. We'll maybe aim towards stamina stuff. So you kind of look at where are the biological strengths, and then you ask, was that fun? Did you like that? Did you like a little bit of success there? And I know other countries, do this. They have 10 million people. Let me see everyone kind of do this thing. Oh, you 3. You just you're at the top of the line. At age 14, I like what I'm seeing. Let's go ahead and develop you.
Yeah. Well, China did that extremely well when they've tried to get the medal count, get the gold medal count. When the Beijing Olympics, that was one of their big preparations for the prior 10 years. They were identifying talent pools of people that were good at certain things and then channeling them into their developmental camps, probably in less than favorable ways that as someone from the West would see it, but. At the end of the day, that's what they would do. They would say, hey, you're a great gymnast potential. You're going to go to the gymnastics camp. We're taking you from your family. The next 10 years, you're doing this. Because we want to beat the U.S. in 2008 in Beijing with the medal count.
And we have a pay to play in the United States. If we said, hey, United States, how about we give $100,000 to the next gold medal or $1 million to the next gold medal, well, that incentive would align certain communities. Like, let's see if we can foster that. Imagine if half went to the athlete and the other half went to the group that helped develop that athlete. Then we might think differently.
Oh, there's nothing there's nothing for development in the Olympics. I think the U.S. is unbelievable. The fact that the way that it works is it's kind of functional one way. The one good thing about this is they've left it completely to the private sector. That's all I would say. Usually our government doesn't do that very well, but in this case, the government's done an amazing job to say we will provide zero support to the Olympic athletes, and our government does nothing to it until you actually make the team, and then you're the national governing body, which is a nonprofit organization for that, like gymnastics or swimming and diving or ski and snowboard or whatever it is, and they're not funded by the federal government in any form, which is really interesting. But back to what we were saying about movement and mechanics and like the specificity. Back to the idea of like the Europeans or Australia or the other countries, they'll train people to hit the ball hard and fast first and be less technical. If you think about that, it makes perfect sense to what you actually see take off in pro sports. So the Super Bowl is this weekend. So you have like Patrick Mahomes, who's one of the more off the cuff type of athletes that we've ever seen. Mechanically does some sound things, but he does a lot of his play is unsound. The way that he moves is relatively unsound. When you look at him, you're like, you don't first think, wow, this guy's a phenomenal athlete at first motion, but then you saw him like be elusive with people, and what he does in the field, you're like, wow, that's incredible. But we see this too in Major League Baseball, where if we were to train people, say we trained pitchers back at the age of like 8, and you all were taught you had to do exactly this. Your elbow has to be exactly this position, your foot has to be in this position, your hip has to do exactly this, and we teach all of these mechanical things. We'd end up with all of these robots at the age of 20 to 25, and then they'd be pitching in the big leagues. And they basically would be throwing batting practice because the guys would just rake off of everything they see. What the Major League Baseball wants now more than anything
is unique.
Yeah. You throw hard, you throw fast, and you throw kind of awkward.
Yeah.
That's great. Now, your career may not be very long, but that's fine. Because it's interesting, if you watch baseball and you get into it and you start watching like into the playoffs, once a team has seen the pitcher, so like say the pitcher gets to the first 3 innings and goes through the lineup, if that pitcher is to stay in the game for the 4th or 5th inning, there's always more people on base. because it's like I figured out the timing, I figured out the mechanics. I've been watching this guy throw 40 pitches so far. They start hitting. That's how good these guys are, right? So this deception of it's a little awkward, a little hard to keep up with the timing, a little bit elusive. Plus the components of velocity are very, very important. Much more so than mechanics.
And I would have thought it had been a little bit of fatigue, but yeah, you know, they're just that good that they figured it out. You're not tired yet. They just figured you out.
Most likely. Yeah. It's because we don't see velocity drop in the pitch at that point. At
that count.
Yeah, later on. But in the regular season, you'll see guys go 6, 7, 8 innings. Some guys will throw 9 innings. You never see that in the playoffs.
Yeah.
Because the level of hitter they're facing and the focus and the incentive to win is so intense that it's like it's just amazing to watch.
Yeah. Well, it definitely speaks to the razor edge of skill acquisition, and I think it's good to kind of think about skill. You think of like big gross motor, and then you look of like fine tune motor, and gross motor. What I like about gross motor, that looks like a jump, a sprint, sprint uphill, flying speed, cutting back and forth, big gross things. Gross things means, the exact opposite of fine tuned. It's the opposite of that. And when you do that at a young age, I think it stimulates hormones at an elite level, stimulates your brain at an elite level. It gets the nerve pathways really robust for what's called myelin growth. The myelin around your nerve cell gets thick, and the thicker that myelin gets, the faster it can conduct energy through your body. And I know that works, and I know it speaks a lot. And when you go fine-tuned, like that's the grip, that's the wrist position, that's the perfect degree of layback or where your toes pointing. I get it. That's how you play the sport, but overly focus on that, and I think you lose the big motor, the gross motor, and that you lose the engine for the sake of fine tuning. And fine tuning, I think by definition, whatever you're talking about, it could be your engine in your car or the engine in your AI bot or your own personal engine. It comes after your engine's somewhat built that can handle the fine tuning.
Yeah. Yeah, you have to make it to the race. You have to make it to the event with can you do the basics at a certain level? And then you start to hone it in. I will say too, I think that you have to be, when in coaching, you can't let somebody be completely off the chart with poor mechanics, So like it's a basketball kid shooting, like if they're just doing things that fundamentally won't get them there, then some correction is necessary, right? But this idea of overly correcting and being overly specific at an early age is not supported.
Yeah. Well, so I have a question for you. So you've done a lot of basketball coaching in your life. So give me, like, from the boy standpoint, what is an appropriate coaching cue for, say, an 8-year-old versus 10, 12, 14? Do you say the same thing of like, forearm vertical, elbow, in front of your armpit? Like, give me an idea of where you really start honing in that skill.
For an 8-year-old, I think the coach would be like, how many hours do you practice? Let's just go do that. Let's just go have fun and like put the ball in the air and have fun with it and get the reps in so the ball handling is good. And, that their size and frame is not enough to like shoot very effectively on a 10-foot rim, right? So their strength is lacking. So if I was to be coaching like a skill set at that time, it'd be a waste to be devoting too much time on shooting. But certainly on ball handling, passing, just playing more so you get a feel for the game and a feel for, working against the defense and, manipulating people would be the big thing there. Then as you start to get, further along, maybe as they get to like 10, 11, then you start looking at like, all right, you were playing for 2 hours a day, 3 hours a day, whatever. You're putting in the time. Then I would start looking at like, what's your percentage of making shots? So if you practiced for 3 hours and you took, 1,000 shots, how many did you make? So if you made 300, that's not very good. Like, I'd want you to be making, at that age, if you made somewhere close to 50% would be a very good number. 30% is an okay place to start, but you want to get as close to 50 as soon as you can. So what's preventing you from doing that? Is it a focus point of like, you don't know what to look at, don't know what to target? Are your fundamentals so poor that you can't get any consistency out of it? That type of thing. And then I would continue to coach the percentage of shooting as the metric, but the variable becomes becomes greater where you guys start to vary speed. So anyone can do it when you have all the time in the world to like set everything up and be super technical. But then when you're in game situation, now the speed is, much, much faster, live defense, whatever.
That's more of a 14, 15?
Not even though. I think it's like, we're doing that right now with Luke. He's 14, I guess. Yeah. So we just started that like really last year at a much higher level, like shooting on the move, shooting with pace. At this point we're making 60% of all shots taken. So then it's like, all right, let's increase pace, which is going to then, drop that percentage to some degree. And then so the effort is to kind of build it back up, But for example, if I've given him some feedback and I've told him from a coaching cue, from a movement standpoint, is like, hey, you have to watch where you miss. So if you miss short, the reason you miss short is either because you didn't use enough legs or because you didn't snap your wrist. It's one of those two factors. If you miss short or long, those are your two variables that you'd want to consider. And then if you miss side to side, it's feet not being set where you're drifting to one side or your elbow is out and not underneath as you suggested. So those are the two corrections in either problem. Mm-hmm. So, but what really pisses me off though is where I'll shoot with them. He's usually shooting, with friends or he's shooting with the return system. But if I shoot with them and I'll see him miss 4 or 5 shots perfectly aligned, but they're short, I'll look at him like, what are we doing?
Figure it out.
Yeah. What do you need to do to fix the problem? You've missed 4 in a row short. Like, stop doing that. Mm-hmm. And then he'll be like, oh yeah. And then he uses his legs and then we're back into like 5, 6 swishes in a row. So it's like, it's there. So the coaching for me is like coach the decision-making process. I'm like, you have to make these corrections yourself. Mm-hmm. In a game situation, if you notice you miss left or right, then you need to set your feet and get your elbow back underneath your body. If you know you're missing short because at the end of the game you're tired, then you better snap the wrist and use more legs. But I can't yell that at you.
Yeah.
That just needs to be something you learn. So I think as you learn the sport, you start developing these higher level strategies.
Well, I wonder how many people though attack skill with that mindset. Because, when you say that, I'm trusting that this young person at age 14 is learning the feedback loop so that whenever he plays, he should be constantly engaged in skill acquisition with just a simple strategy that you've given him. Where I hear a lot of athletes doing like, well, I'm doing more private training. I got more one-on-one. I got to do another private over here. I got to do this. And I'm not so sure if it's improving the IQ. It's just getting the reps in. And I think what's difficult about just getting reps in is the strategy for many young athletes seems to be 2 or 3 practice sessions in the week with 1 or 2 games in the weekend sometimes. And then now I have 1 or 2 privates throughout the week. So now I have 5, 6 days of sport. When in reality, if you just actually spend time with skill acquisition with a feedback loop, you would maximize the practice so that there's other times of the week that they can go for a run, do some squats and lunges, do a strength session.
Oh, yeah.
So I feel that like all young people and families with young athletes have this time dilemma. Where do I put the time? They want to get better. Should they play another sport to become more resilient? Should they go for a run? Should they do 500 jumping jacks? Or do they need to do another private training?
This is on the private training, then this is going to sound outrageous, but I'm going to say it because I saw it live and it's real. And I fear that it happens more often than anyone would like to admit or identify. But so this young kid, I actually rehabbed this kid a little over a year ago, probably for he had a fractured growth plate. I think it was his shoulder. So we rehabbed back into some the throwing mechanics. He did fine. He's done good. It's been a year. He's back with the team. Everything's great. So he was with a private coach working on pitching, and then there was another coach that was there. I don't know what his role was, but it's clearly another coach. And then they had him set up, and they had him set up on a mound, and he was pitching to one of the coaches who was acting as the catcher, and they were going through things. So the way it was set up was definitely like a high-end pitching lesson. He was on the mound. There was a radar gun, and the coaching cues. I was coaching my boys on the side doing strength conditioning with the basketball team, so it's kind of on the side. Then we're just hearing it, but the conversation was around like spinning and spin rates and like the curving, throwing a curveball and doing this with the hand and these types of things. And then of course what the velo was a critical number, and I'm not sure that the ball hit the glove once.
Wow.
Okay, so the spray of the success was on like a 15 by 15 foot wall. Most was if it was covered. by the end of this. Let's just throw the ball hard and hit the glove. Let's not worry about what the actual velo was or what the spin rate was. Like we're not even in the vicinity. If your curveball is amazing, but it lands 15 feet off the plate, it doesn't really help the athlete in any form whatsoever. Certainly doesn't help with any kind of confidence building. And he's certainly not going to get a chance to actually play in the game. Like, let's actually get just the ball in the right. So it was unbelievable to really watch. That was one thing. And then when you're throwing a bullpen especially when velocity is one of the components, it's a highly neurological skill. So you're going to get fatigued, as we talked about earlier. So when you're throwing a velocity bullpen, I mean, 20 to 40 pitches is a great pen, especially for somebody at this age group. To think that they can throw like 60, 80 pitches at a high level is, especially like we just talked about tissue tolerance, is just it's not possible.
Not there.
But here you have a problem where someone pays a certain dollar amount to get a lesson that's 30 minutes or 60 minutes or whatever it is. So we have to fill that time up. Otherwise you don't feel like you got your money's worth. I suppose it's what's happening. I have no idea. But nonetheless, the pen was at least 75 pitches.
Yeah, well then you have the gun, you have the mound, you have the big setup because you're trying to pack in value, or at least perceived value. This is a great private session. In reality, we have to backtrack and say, what are we even doing here?
What are we doing? Yeah. Like, let's develop the athlete as an athlete first, and then let's work on just the fundamentals of the game. And then let's add some variables, like whether or not he has a curveball is irrelevant. Whether or not he throws 70 or 100 is irrelevant at the moment if you can't even like get it over the plate in any form. So it was really quite painful to watch two men coaching this bullpen.
And I doubt either one was his coach for the team.
Yeah, I don't believe so.
Yeah,
they didn't didn't think to change the strategy, or it's just painful to watch.
Well, I imagine if I was a coach of the team, that was one of my pitchers, and the thought was, my pitcher struggles in throwing a strike, and then they're talking about spin rate. I imagine the coach would say, no, I just want him getting in the glove. We need to focus on that first, And I think in the world of sports, what you trust is that the coach is the headmaster of the group. And I think more and more coaches are getting used to doing IDPs with players. And in an IDP, you hopefully will look at their full athletic development and where their opportunities are. And for some, the opportunity of enhanced skill acquisition with a good private training session is really applicable and needed. And hopefully that feedback is collaborated with the head coach. And the role for us, the high performance sports medicine physical therapist, is to come in and help do a strength assessment, speed assessment, reactivity athleticism assessment, a symmetry assessment, and look at both health risk and opportunities for strength and power engagement, and look at the team holistically in that way. And I think when we start having the viewpoint of a healthy team that performs well, then the private sessions, the skill acquisition, giving the right feedback loop, giving the right fundamental development that's fit for a 13-year-old, fit for a 16-year-old, fit for a college team, now it all makes sense. But I think, when things are in chaos, meaning the PT doesn't talk with the coach has no idea how many private trainings are happening or how many other teams the kid's playing for. I think when there's that chaos, it's going to oftentimes lead to overexposure, focusing on the wrong things at the wrong time, and the health of the player is at extreme risk. And it just seems like, what are we doing? This is all silly now.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And I would just go back and say that I don't think that private lessons are a bad thing. I don't think that we're not trying to put down that focus at all. I think there's benefits from coaching, and doing the private coaching can be great. But I would suggest, as if you're a parent or if you are one of those coaches, then just make the point clear that, like, what is the objective of the coaching? It's not about the time you spend; it's about the progress that we make, right? So it's are we moving towards the goal? Don't just worry about, hey, it's $60 for 60 minutes. Maybe you only need 10 minutes. And if it still costs $60, then so be it.
Yeah.
I think this is what's best for the athlete today, and give them value in some other format, but be equipped enough to do that, and be equipped to set those expectations as a coach or a parent that's okay if you get, if the session's over in 20 minutes, but you learned something amazing that day and now you need just a week to go practice it, then that's valuable.
Yeah.
Don't feel like you have to be forced into it. Because I think that's where it gets a little sideways,
Well, I've seen, my family, we've used private training with our daughters as well. And it's usually been either off season or preseason. It's usually aligned with the coach, and the coach is aware of the things they're working on, or the coach is supporting it and actually there as well. So it feels best when there's good communication and when the timing is right. It feels horrible when there's no communication and the timing is wrong. And that exactly speaks to where we at in the curve of athlete development. Are we on the risk of overexposure, which now we're causing injury? Or are we on the end where we should be doing things developmentally and we're actually not doing the developmental things? We're focused on fine-tuning when we should be focusing on gross motor. So both of those, the head coach should be aware of that it should be aligned. And I think that's the dream of really any good functioning team is alignment. And when you take away communication, it's tough. It stresses it. And I know the best coaches out there, the ones that do privates and the managed teams, I know that communication is always high up on the radar. And oftentimes they might be control freaks, and rightly so. I know one of the best football coaches in the whole area. He's a bit of a control freak, rightly so. He wants to know what all of his players are doing, and he wins championships that way.
Well, thanks for watching KIMEcast. Listen, next time, if you guys have comments, shoot the comments down in the comments below. We'd love to hit you up and communicate with you that way. We'll catch you on the next one.